In this update, we're going to go over a 2-week overview as I'll be going on vacation with my family. So let's go ahead and break down the details for you in this update. Take a look at the overall setup. We've got a massive ridge of high pressure literally locked over a good part of the central and eastern 2/3 of the U.S. Plenty of warm temperatures. In fact, even lows crept well into the 80s all the way up into Minnesota this morning. And that ridge will only expand and build eastward as we get into early next week, especially there into the northeast. Plenty of record highs are going to be broken and going to be tapping into those triple digits, especially in those areas around Philadelphia, DC, back into New York City, into Baltimore. Yes, let's take a look at some of that extreme heat. In fact, we've got numerous heat advisories and extreme heat warnings in place for a good part of the upper Midwest, even were major to extreme impacts combined with that humidity. We're talking about dangerous levels, folks. Heat indices of 105, 110 is likely not out of the question. Yes, this is the first significant heat wave of summer, and it's coming in with a vengeance, and it's going to be prolonged. It's not just going to be a one-day punch. I think it's going to last pretty much all week long, especially for those areas into the northeast. In fact, you got extreme levels combined with the humidity and the heat, extreme impacts to the body in places like Chicago, back in Indianapolis, Louisville, as well as into Pittsburgh. But even along the coast into the Carolinas, the DC area, Baltimore, even further north into New York, back into Boston, they could even reach 100 degrees in Hartford, Connecticut. Yes, plenty of warm conditions on the way. And you can see where the ridge is, right? You got the ridge building across a good part of the central and eastern 2/3. That's all the sinking air. That's why we have numerous heat records will unfold. But look out west, and those areas are in the monsoonal flow is going to be alive and prevalent. Complements of the Pacific moisture that's been inundating the same areas, and that's just going to be a steady stream of moisture that's going to be impacting a good part of western portions of Texas as well as into New Mexico. That swings into the Panhandle and then goes up and over the ridge in parts of Kansas, all the way through Iowa, back into Wisconsin. It's kind of feast or famine. You get nothing under that ridge, and you get everything elongated just to the northern boundary of that ridge of high pressure. And it's definitely noticeable on the satellite picture this morning. You've got the kind of the ring of fire taking shape, which is pretty common in the summertime. And unless you're under that ridge, you're basically not going to get, you're not going to get anything on outside of that ridge. You get all the ingredients in place and numerous showers and thunderstorms and heavy rainfall, and likely some of those will turn severe. Pretty quiet out in the Atlantic. In fact, there was a little small system that popped up this morning, little 10%, not heading towards is heading actually away from the United States. But the Pacific, man, it's just been really active. In fact, we got yet another potential storm yet to be named, and that could be Flossie as we get into early next week, especially by the middle of next week. That could be the earliest F named storm at the Pacific on record. That gives you an idea how busy it's been. Basically extremely quiet in the Atlantic, but it's all systems go there in the Pacific. They've just been spitting out relentless systems, kind of one after another. And the difference with some of these systems, just like last time with Eric, it actually turned upward, which is fairly rare at this time of season. And Flossie maybe kind of looks to do the same thing in the longer term, turn a little bit further north in the longer term, and likely mix in with that monsoonal flow and back into releasing more steady precipitation for those areas inland into New Mexico and then further north. But heading into Tuesday, the June 24th timeframe, in fact, they already have a moderate risk for excessive rainfall. Now, this area desperately needs the rain, but it's going to be coming too much too fast. Flood warnings are in place, flood watches in place, and those are going to help out all of the wildfires down there into New Mexico. And that's going to spread all the heavier rain just to the northern periphery of the boundary where they got hit hard in the Dakotas. They've got another setup coming up on Tuesday with more heavy rainfall and severe storms back into Iowa as well as into Wisconsin that will bleed over into Michigan. But yes, over that 24-hour time span on Tuesday, heading into Wednesday morning, yeah, it's basically where, if you're underneath that ridge, you got all the sinking air. You can see where the high pressure is. A lot of the sinking air out in the central, Midwest, mid-south areas, southeast, and into the northeast. And of course, all those areas out west desperately need the rain, but the flow is alive and prevalent into New Mexico, back into Colorado, as well as into Nebraska, back into the Dakotas again, into Iowa, those areas into Wisconsin. And the heat dome continues on Tuesday. In fact, I think it's going to be maxing out. We could be looking at upwards to almost 70 new record high temperatures on this day. And yeah, plenty of 90s, but even hundreds creeping up into Virginia, into the Carolinas, even along the eastern seaboard, places like DC and Baltimore and New York City and Connecticut and Hartford, Boston, all those series could see triple digit heat. Yeah, pretty fairly rare for them. In fact, this could be the warmest or hottest since 2012 in some of these areas. So yes, dangerously hot setup combined with those higher humidity values. You could be looking at heat indices approaching the 110, if not even 115 range in spots. Very dangerous. But I do feel the high starts to break down just a little bit, right? So I think it maxes out on Tuesday. Still going to be with them on Thursday and Friday, but it's going to be enough to bring at least afternoon showers back into the picture, along this boundary within the Northeast, back into the Southeast. And it's kind of the ring around the rosy here in the same places with outside of that ridge. That's where all this thunderstorm activity will likely be. And I think eventually, like I mentioned, the ridge of high pressure is going to be shifting a little bit further south and push back eventually into the central part of the U.S. And I think it starts to break down up here into the Northeast, especially as we get into next weekend, the weekend coming up right now. So there's the precipitation on Saturday as the ridge of high pressure will start to kind of weaken and shift further south. And as it does, that will shift the rain access along its way. So you'll still get some of the sea breeze action further south, and then you'll get that kind of the ring of fire action further north. And there is that tropical system down there in Mexico that will be continuing to lift west and northwest, and eventually impacting with heavier rains into areas of the Baja California, but especially there back into New Mexico and feeding into that monsoonal flow as you got a bona fide low pressure center continuing to push further and further north and pushing that moisture supply further north as well. But overall, the breakdown for the next 7 days, or at least through the end of June for your rainfall amounts, kind of looks like this, right? Where you got the ridge and where you got the high pressure, that's where all the sinking air is. That's where the hottest temperature will likely be. And outside of that, you got all the heavy rain. So there's the prevalent monsoonal flow that will go through New Mexico. That's why they have the moderate risk for excessive rainfall on Tuesday. And that will just feed into some of these areas. It could see 4 to 6 inches of rainfall, if not maybe more, combined between now and the end of the month through Iowa, back into Minnesota, getting into Wisconsin, bone dry still out west, and then very dry out there, continuing to dry out over Oklahoma and Texas and a good part of Arkansas as well. But I do feel maybe a weak cool front will likely try to slip through the cracks and sink a little bit further south to bring at least some precipitation for those areas into Oklahoma and portions of North Texas likely on, this will be a ways out. This will be Tuesday, July the 1st time frame before that ridge of high pressure, I think, slowly starts to build back into the southern areas of the U.S. and likely will expand. So as we head into July the 2nd, I think the ridge will start to build over Texas, over Louisiana, Arkansas, Oklahoma, New Mexico, back into the Arizona region. And I just feel like that will expand heading into the July 4th weekend, as much of the Mid-South will be likely experiencing those triple-digit temperatures by then, with all the sinking air that the Northeast is going to experience over the next couple of days. That high pressure will eventually sink back into the middle part of the country, over the Southeast, over the southern central plains, and back in, highlighted into the desert Southwest, and really kind of expanding, taking that overall summer look and then pushing the storm track well back north again, back through the Dakotas, like they actually saw the other day. So guys, I appreciate you guys watching. Like I said, I'll be going on vacation for 2 weeks with my family, so I'll be back after the July 4th weekend and give you a full update then. So y'all be safe out there and stay tuned for the next update. Thanks.